So after 2 years of stationary RV living, what are the 5 things I really love about living in my RV? And what are the 5 things that I don't like quite so much? Stay tuned. I'm going to talk about them. Welcome to RV Retirement Redesign, where we are redesigning and redefining. We're redesigning our retirement and redefining RV living, not because we want a cheap way to survive, but because we want to thrive in this new season of life on our terms. So number 1 is the whole idea of tiny living. I do like the idea. I wasn't sure to begin with. You know, we moved from 4,200 square feet to 1,200 square feet to now 420 square feet. And I do like my space, but what I have found is when you live tiny, then it's so much easier to clean things up, for instance. And frankly, as you get older, you don't want to spend as much time cleaning and mopping and, all those kinds of routine chores that you have to do to maintain the inside of your home. And then the outside is completely different maintenance than living in a traditional bricks and mortar as well. The other thing for me is I love living on one level. The idea of living in like a condo, which we did before, we lived upstairs, and that was good because I don't like having people over me and listening to their footsteps or, the noise that happens when you live in a multi-level complex of that sort. On the other hand, I have a bad ankle, and my ankle will give out on me. So I can't be climbing concrete stairs, especially living in, the mountains of Colorado where we have lots of snow and ice. It's really a danger. So living on one level is really nice. We also have 2 bathrooms, and sometimes people don't realize that when you live tiny or when you live in an RV, you can still have some of those special amenities that you have in a regular bricks and mortar home. One of those is 2 bathrooms. The other thing is because we have a toy hauler, we chose that deliberately, we have the space to have things like pantries for our food. We have a freezer so that we can make larger meals or buy in bulk and quantity and then freeze those. We have a washer and dryer back there. So we have that extra space. Now it does make our living area a little smaller, but there's just the 2 of us up here and it works out just fine for us. Now, what's the downside of that? Well, just as it's easy to clean, it is so easy for it to get messy. Just a couple things out of place when you're in a smaller area, it makes it look messy. So you really do have to continually pick up after yourself or just agree to live in a little bit of a mess until you're able to get it all cleaned up. The other thing that's a little bit of a drawback is you don't have a way to really get away from each other. There are times, it doesn't matter how long you've been married, you want your own space. And I work from home, and so I'm working in the living room. And sometimes Bob and Izzy can get noisy, and it is hard for me to concentrate on my work. And on the other hand, sometimes Bob's on the phone talking to his clients, and Izzy and I get noisy. And I'm sure Izzy has her own issues, but we're not going to go into those. The other, and probably the final thing about living in this kind of a situation is just the mail issue. It is a big issue for me. FedEx is horrible here. We can't get a delivery from FedEx. UPS is pretty reliable. Amazon knows how to get here. Love Amazon, right? And then that means we have to have a mailbox someplace else because the Postal Service does not service individual RV homes in our RV park. And so it's not that big of a deal, but you do have to make that extra trip. And in the winter, it's a little bit of an annoyance. However, balance those things. Living small, living stationary in an RV still really is a great way to live. Number 2 has to do with the issue of storage. And the reality is there's a lot more storage in our RV than we really anticipated. And that's a good thing because when you are living full-time, In an RV park, you really don't have the luxury of having other kind of outbuildings where you can store things. Because again, it's just the two of us, some of the extra sleeping areas are now our storage areas. The other part of that is because, again, we are stationary, we can have things like pantries and things like that that if you were moving around would not be stable enough to, to keep in your RV. And again, a toy hauler makes that extra easy for us. The other idea is that because we are stationary, we can have some outdoor storage that is year round that, again, you primarily could not have if you were moving around. Because we have our RV skirted, the area underneath our bedroom, which would traditionally go into the back of a truck, is now enclosed. And that allows us to store some things that are okay to store outside. In our back patio area, we also have some storage boxes, a little storage shed, a bench that you can store things in. And during the summer, this holds our lawn chair pads and things like that, and little knickknacks that we have outside, some extra lawn equipment, things like that. And then in the winter, we can just store all that stuff away in there. Bob is storing some of his fishing stuff that he doesn't want to leave in the boat all winter long in our storage shed, and that can be locked and undisturbed for the winter until the spring comes and the new fishing season starts. So sometimes you think you won't have that storage, but you do. Now, the downside is that you really can't buy stuff. So if you're a shopper and you want to buy new things all the time for your RV, the rule kind of has to be if you buy something and you bring it into the RV, something else has to go out. So I guess that's a good and bad thing, because part of that is it makes you think about what you are purchasing, why you are purchasing it. And when you really think through those kinds of things, then you end up saving a little bit of money. So maybe that's a good thing instead of a bad thing. The hard thing, I think, is just the whole idea of downsizing and living in an RV. We actually still have a storage that we rent down in the Springs, and that's an extra charge every month. And it's a decision on what are you going to do with that stuff that's in there. We have a little bit of furniture that's still in there, and we still, after 2 years, haven't made all those decisions. So if you don't have enough space, if you haven't completely downsized, if you haven't completely minimalized, then the downside is you're probably going to have a storage space that you're renting, and that costs you a little bit of money. I do like the opportunity and the option of having different locations to live in. Now you can, if you're lucky enough to live in a state, in an area where you could actually purchase some land that your RV can go on, great. That's a wonderful option. Unfortunately, we don't have that option in our area of Colorado. Kind of sad about that, actually. You can also have the option of living in an RV park. That was the best option when we started out as well. So we're happy with that for this season, this time frame. You can also, make the choice to move. And that could be either just moving down the street to another park, to another location, or it might be, as we're contemplating sometime in the future, to maybe go 6 months into a warm area and then come back and have our 6 months in this area with Bob's fishing business and our family. So there are options and opportunities when you live in an RV, even stationary, that perhaps you don't have in a bricks and mortar. Now, what are the downsides? Well, living in an RV park is what I can talk about. I'd love to buy the land. The state of Colorado, and particularly our area, are not friendly to RV living full time. And so until they kind of catch up to what the trends are, that's just not going to be an option for us. I also can only speak to living in an RV park in pretty much one location. And what I realized there is you have to make some choices, and you have to adhere to the different rules and regulations. And there's always a threat over your head. It's the threat of if you don't live with the rules. There's a threat if they don't like you. They can ask you to leave. There's the threat that the park could be sold. There's the threat that, a natural disaster could happen. How would you leave? In our case, it's fire or something like that. So there are some extenuating kind of concerns that are not as optimal when you live in an RV park. And for me, I've lived through a very heavy snow season last year, and I'm not sure I want to live in that kind of snow every year, for the rest of my life anyway. So the downsides, the upsides, balancing those things out. Again, I still love where I'm at. And so in my case, the check mark is for I like living in the location that I'm at. Number 4 is decorating. In your bricks and mortar home, you have all these little nooks and crannies that you can decorate to make your home your own. And when you live in an RV, the valances are permanent. The furniture is permanent. You can't, redecorate. You can't move your furniture around. You can't reorganize things that are permanent in your RV. There's not a lot of shelving that allows you to, put the little knickknacks on. You can add pillows, you can add rugs, you can add towels, you can add those kinds of things to make, again, your home your own. But not a lot of room to decorate. In our case, I pretty much inside put a couple things up for fall to change the season this year. But that is kind of a downside. Now, the upside is I don't know that I really want to do a lot of decorating. There's a lot of work that has to go into that. Depending on where you live, they're just dust collectors, right? So you're constantly dusting things like that. And what I have found is really my decorating is done more outside. We have a nice deck around our RV, and we have I have a baker's rack out there. We have some potting plant kind of holders on our deck rails, and my little patio I can decorate in the summer. So decorating, if you like to do a lot of decorating, can be a bit difficult, especially if you're in a newer RV. However, if you're in an older RV and you want to renovate, well, that's completely different. You can do a lot more decorating in that way. Now, the 5th category is about friends. When you live in an RV and you move into a park, or especially if you move away from your family, then there is this distance that happens because you may or may not live around the corner anymore or within a quick visit anymore. And so it's more of a planning for somebody to have to come and visit you. The upside, however, is the friends that you meet. And I have to say that in our park, we have met some very, very nice people, and we have built a community here. And we look out for each other, we take care of each other when needed. And the downside of that is eventually those friends may move on. We met some friends last year who stayed here for about 5 or 6 months, and they more or less are people who travel in their RV. And rather than being full-time, they spent just a period of time here because of some maintenance issue and other things that they were working on. And then when the springtime rolled around, they left and were boondocking and traveling around, and we're very happy for them. But we do miss those friends that we make as well, and it feels sad when they leave. However, the nice thing is, again, that juxtaposition between the good and the bad is that they do travel and they do come around, and in fact, we just went and visited them last weekend. So living in our RV over the past 2 years has brought a lot of pros and cons. It's brought a lot of adventures and a lot of challenges. What it has mostly brought, though, is a very peaceful and relaxing for us way to live and a season of enjoyment. And we made the right choice. Hey, thanks for tuning in today. And if you enjoyed this episode, would you please do us the favor of liking and subscribing? We really appreciate you, and we appreciate the time that you took out of your day to watch this video. We'll see you next week.